Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 32 of UK League Chat. At this time, we're joined by Barrage head coach Surza. Surza, how is it going?
It's going well. How are you doing?
Going very well here as well. Um, so, yeah, glad to have you on, and so we can obviously chat a bit about the Barrage split. Um, and to just jump right in, just before I think we kind of touch on that, I think one thing we wanted to cover a bit was the kind of interesting position you're in, that you are a coach from NA that's kind of come, metaphorically, I guess, to EU. You are still in NA physically, but that's kind of made that transition over to EU with Barrage. Um, just I just wondered how you even sort of got into coaching in the first place, just even sort of before that switch, because a lot of players, I think you often find that a lot of coaches, sorry, you often find that they were players first and kind of transition to it that way. Um, but I couldn't quite, as far as I understand, that wasn't the case, right?
No, no. I actually never was like a high level player. So I got into coaching actually through MMOs like World of Warcraft. So I used to be a big theory crafter in
Hmm.
MMOs like World of Warcraft. I love the math, love doing all that kind of stuff to optimize. So I had played those games pretty high level competitively for a while, but I ended up playing. Pretty much that ended up breaking down. I was kind of looking for something else to kind of take that place of playing MMOs with friends. So I saw a post on like the looking for team kind of forums back on League of Legends. So like, yeah, we want like low diamonds for this team that's going to go into the NACS. I'm like, I'm platinum. I can make diamond in a few weeks. I did not make diamond in a few weeks, but they also said they were looking for an analyst. I'm like, I did theory crafting. I've done all this kind of stuff with math. Might as well. So that's how I got into actually like the competitive scene.
Hmm.
And from there, I was working with a team where the coach had to leave, and I actually stepped in to take his place. And that's where I found I really enjoyed the like coaching aspect instead of more analytics. I still do the analytics stuff, but like for me, I found a real enjoyment in working with the players and in drafting, and that's kind of how I got into coaching.
Cool. So you kind of say that you started around sort of the challenger scene, kind of that sort of level. Um, One thing I wanted to talk about was the kind of difference in the amateur scene, if you like, with NA compared to EU. Um, so first of all, I just wondered if there was sort of a conscious effort for you to eventually come to Europe, because you know I think without going into too many details, that there's not a huge amount in NA. I don't think there is the what's now the Academy League, um, but other than that, there's not, as far as I could tell, necessarily much sort of structure around that. So was there,
You have like regional teams, but I think there's a clear like gap,
yeah, maybe like
isn't there,
collegiate and
between like
stuff like that? But
academy and
was
regional?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
so was that like a conscious effort that you thought would be an idea to maybe try in the ERLs, or was was that just
Yeah.
something that kind of happened naturally?
So so with that, like NA Amateur's kind of gone through a rough time. Before the Academy League, actually NA Amateur was pretty strong. There's a lot of competitive teams, like a lot of players that you actually see now in Academy and even Pro were playing in NA Amateur because we had the NACS Open qualifier for every organization to
Mhm.
play for. After Academy, they took away that route to kind of go pro, even though it was really hard to go from amateur NACS to LCS. So now the only way to actually get into academy was through tryouts, which aren't necessarily open. It's kind of more on who you know and kind of getting noticed in the scene rather than having anything to really play for. Any amateur after the launch of academy kind of died for a year or so. So for me, I went into NA amateur kind of as a uh, proof that I could really be a head coach. Before that, I was kind of more of a strategic coach, assistant coach, and so I was coaching there for a year. And in an amateur, it like we had the team that was really really dominant for that entire year, and that pretty much did nothing to actually improve viability for me or the players. None of those players actually got picked up for academy.
Mhm.
Or if they did, they only got picked up for like as an emergency sub for just like 6 games. And for me, that was kind of the realization that if I'm going to be a coach that isn't a player coach that doesn't already have that kind of connections in NA, there's actually no growth potential here. So that's when I started actively looking to go to Europe, where there actually is growth potential. There's actually something to play for. You kind of have that potential growth, and you have that potential to actually be noticed as a coach.
Do you think?
I think as well, what I've realised a little bit with, and because we've had this discussion a little bit on the podcast prior, and I think after kind of looking at it, so with the LEC, there's still no relegation. You know, it's the exact same with the LCS, but what differs is that there's a wider scope below the LEC. That while you've got the academy leagues, you've got the academy teams, sorry, you've also got then other players who can also compete against those, and you don't have that with NA. It's kind of like they've looked at it, they thought, oh, academy teams, oh well, we'll just put them all in one league, and I think that if that was the same in EU, I think it would have the same detrimental effect because there wouldn't have been that scope of players, and I think that's why, even though there's no official promotion to LEC, like you have avenues and ladders to get to it, where I don't think you have that right now in NA.
Right. I mean, that's one of I think the biggest walls right now is there's a lot of amateur teams that actually can contest academy teams. I mean, like we actually played in one tournament where we actually got to play against FlyQuest Academy and Echo Fox Academy, and we beat FlyQuest Academy. Like, amateur teams exist with good players that can really prove themselves, but they don't have that platform to prove themselves in NA that you do in Europe. I love that we get to play against academy teams. It really gets to show that, you know, your roster can be as good, even if you're not on the same kind of budget.
Yeah. And do you see that something that's been improved at all in NA? Like I know, like you won TCS, right? The Tyler 1 tournament a couple of years back, and I've seen people even saying like that's like the last hope for like amateur in NA is like Tyler 1's tournament. Not being funny, it's like the most watched amateur thing probably anywhere. And yeah, do you think that like stuff like that is at least going to improve it a little bit, or do you think there needs to be a bit more of a push for it still?
There still needs to be a pretty big push for it. The TCS has kind of gone away from being like an amateur tournament to more being like a streamer tournament. The last TCS, I think only like 2 amateur teams even got into it. The big thing that's gone on for amateur right now is actually the Skarner circuit. It's a lot of games played. Like our assistant coach Deus and our former assistant coach Lucian were both in the circuit for that, and they were playing like 4 or 5 best of 5s a week just to try and get into Scouting Grounds, just for those players to get a shot to be kind of noticed at Scouting Grounds. Like that's the kind of big event right now, but even then it's not even a guarantee to get into an academy.
So what do you think there could be then? Because I see a lot of arguments saying that even with the academy league that's there now, it's not really like a competition that people necessarily want to win. Like you don't really get recognition for winning it, and that's something that they say just in general about NA talent, that is, you know, maybe doesn't progress because they're not competing for stuff. It doesn't maybe push them as much. So do you think it would be good even, I don't know, even if they could do like a Eastern Western league or something with maybe like half of the academy leagues in one of them, half the academy team, in one with other amateur teams, so there's people, you know, at least then maybe with some competition that they have a reason to want to beat each other and get better. So yeah, I don't know, what kind of thing do you think would help?
Yeah, so this is an issue I've kind of been looking at for like the past 2 years, and something like that where you kind of make a East-West, kind of make your own like sort of NA Master situation, where you have the amateur teams have the ability to actually play against the academy teams and give them something to play for. Like right now, academy is its own isolated league. Like if you win, yay, you get prize pool, but outside of that, you know, it's all academy teams. A lot of them are either they're like subs on a bench. Like the approach that each LCS organization has to academy teams are different. Some are for development, some are just to have a sub roster, some are for a 10-man roster. Having them play against teams that are just actively trying to fight to prove themselves, I think would make it more interesting. I mean, how often is the narrative in Europe, you know, the non-academy teams versus the academy teams and who can beat the academy teams, you know, like it creates a good narrative for them. And the other big thing is that it also gives, like, by making it an East versus West, you can, you know, push that narrative. You can really make it so that they're playing for like regional pride or something like that. Because that's one of the things I love about, you know, the ERLs. You got all these different regions, they're all playing for regional pride. You get all that kind of, you know, regional support behind the teams. And it just even though like winning EU Masters isn't going to get you into the LEC, it's still, you're playing for something to be recognized and noticed, so you can potentially go to the LEC. And like right now with academy teams, like they already know, the players already know where they sit, but the amateur players don't, and that gives them a shot to get onto academy or to LCS.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that there's some, so it's added exposure to players. So while obviously I don't think sometimes with ERLs, some ERLs are dealt with not as good as others, but EU Masters particular is really handled well in terms of a branding point. That like you will get neutrals who will watch EU Masters because it's always been known as these are the upcoming talents, or these are the players who have gone back down the leagues and worked their way up. There's always these narratives, and that's why EU Masters is a very popular tournament in Europe. And I think that because that there's no kind of branding around like academy. Like I don't care about academy finals, or academy playoffs and stuff like that. But maybe if there was a different kind of branding approach, it gets more people watching it, and some people thrive off actually having more recognition at the end of it. Because I know that, for example, if EU Masters was not like streamed and stuff, it will be obviously this is out of the world, or it wasn't as branded well. I don't think it would be as successful in terms of a quantity standpoint, because you've got these other organizations where their branding and their kind of follower base could increase because of EU Masters and because of going into that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you don't get that with Academy, because who cares? Why do Golden Guardians Academy care about getting a little bit extra money when really they're going to be prioritizing solely on the LCS at that point?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And then kind of moving on a bit from that. So you mentioned that it was kind of like a conscious thing to try and get into a team in Europe. How did that team end up being Barrage then? Was that just sort of one that was available at the time? Was that an org that you'd had your eye on at all, or?
So it's kind of one. It was like, so I was looking for any kind of European team, preferably UK, just because easier to transition to UK for me. With Barrage, I saw they had an opening, and then I also knew Frumi through Andy Bendy. So I hadn't actually met Frumi at that point, but I knew he had worked with Andy Bendy, so I talked to Andy Bendy about it, and he told me good things about him. So I saw the record, and for me, I kind of saw the situation at Barrage as a good challenge. They hadn't been performing well. This is an opportunity, to really step in, show what I've got. I pretty much through the whole last year went through joining a team that wasn't doing great and making them top team in an amateur. Let's see if I can do that in Europe. And with Barrage, love the staff. This has actually probably been the first org that I've really enjoyed working in the organization outside of just like coaching everything. Like working at Barrage has been great. And it really made so I wanted to put the effort in to make something good at Barrage. And so far, I feel like we've been successful at that, given the circumstances.
Mm-hmm. So too, and one thing you mentioned there about Andy Bendy, because if anyone does know, that was when he went from NA to play with Enclave. With Barrage, you brought over Flares as well. Do you see that being a potential avenue for maybe more NA players to try their hand as well? Because you kind of mentioned that it's kind of that thing of who you know, and I think I heard that about Flares before when people have sort of questioned why perhaps he doesn't get a shot at least in academy, and it was maybe that kind of case like, yeah, it's like kind of like a boys club kind of thing, and if you're not in the inner circle, maybe you don't get the chance you should. Do you see that being like a more viable avenue for some more players to try then? Because before that, like those are the only two I can really even think of, like any NA players that have come to Europe. Just happen to kind of both be in the UK as well.
Well, the interesting thing about that is with both Flares and Andy Bendy is that neither of them have gone into academy teams, despite them both putting up performances in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I think it definitely will be a bigger round. Like to your point, the kind of boys club kind of thing. It's kind of like what some of us in NA amateur call it the LCS country club. You kind of know someone in the country club to get into the country club. But yeah, I think it's definitely an avenue for NA players, because I think both Andy Bendy and Flares proved that they can compete in Europe. Like they came here and they weren't detrimental players on the team by any means.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not even like top amateur talent. The biggest thing that I've noticed between working in Europe versus NA isn't actually a difference in like mechanical ability or anything like that between players. It's a lot of it comes down to the mentality and just the environment that the players have been given. NA players just don't have that environment where they're playing for anything substantial. So they're not like used to these environments where they're not playing for anything substantial. And in solo queue, there's nothing to really play for to get noticed. So it's not like solo queue is a serious environment, and their like typical match experience isn't something that is going to be super serious either. Whereas in Europe, solo queue's huge. Everyone's playing to win. You have all of these tournaments. Like it's just the environment that's different between the two. And if you take an NA player and put them in an EU environment, they can still shine, just like Flares and Andy did.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen.
I feel like as well. I feel like as well that in NA, and I see it more often, is that I feel like you've got a better chance of becoming a really good streamer, being a better player than what you have got to be in a good professional. You don't see that. That is, I think, a really big difference between, I think, what I see from EU and NA. Obviously, we have a lot of still streamers in EU, but the amount of streamers who are like, really, really good players who have then decided to just say, I'm just going to stream because, maybe that's because there's just more money in streaming at that point. But then it kind of shows that there's not that progression, or there's not even that attitude to kind of become a professional when you know that you've got other avenues, where I don't think you see that as often in EU. You kind of see mainly streamers in EU are, obviously there's a few, but mainly are like players who have become really good and either retired and gone into streaming or are streaming while they are playing, where you don't really see that in NA. It's kind of like, you've got like, just a few players, who kind of decide that they're just going to commit straight to streaming. There's not that both in there.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, even like for example, I've seen like conversations recently about roster build in particular, I think in NA, and that there needs to be like an overhaul of how that's done. Do you think that could even have like trickle down effects? Because if you say the things like solo queue, like the players know that it might not get them noticed playing well because of this whole sort of like country club thing where if you're playing well in solo queue or in amateur tournaments, it doesn't matter if you don't know someone, because otherwise you don't get your chance anyway. Do you think if even the roster building had a bit of a shake up and people were getting more of a chance, and that could even boost solo queue a bit, people take that more seriously, and do you see that as being maybe a bit of a trigger, if you like?
Yeah. So I think there's two big things that could very much improve both the solo queue environment for NA and then that kind of trickle down effect. I do think roster building needs to be massively overhauled in NA in general. From when I last worked with a LCS organization, and then just with how it is in NA amateur itself, like roster building in Europe is completely different from NA. Like you guys, like here I trialed for months both seasons. In NA, there was no trialing done. Like for an LCS team, there was no trialing done for their roster. For amateur, you never get to trial. Like you do some minor trialing, but usually NA amateur rosters, because they're not paid, or typically you get players that like to play with each other, players that trust in a coach, or players that trust in an organization. It's kind of, you keep teams together because they like playing together. You're not like keeping them together because they're paid or anything. I think only a few amateur rosters even see kind of a salary. So like that's one thing, is like if you improve that environment where there's actually like actual tryouts available, like open tryouts available for players for like academy teams, then you have players that actually have something to play for them to actually care about solo queue. Another big thing is if you create like a clear path from amateur to academy, because there's already been shown that there's a clear, if you get onto academy, there's a good shot you go to LCS. So it's getting from amateur to academy that's the real issue right now. And there's like that big wall between amateur and academy. And if there was something that you could actually play for to get onto academy, or if amateur was being played with academy, you now have a reason to play solo queue, to be noticed, to get picked up by these teams that are playing against the academy team, so you can really prove yourself. Right now, you can be top of the ladder or bottom of the ladder in NA. If you're a good player, you'll be picked up by an amateur team, but you still won't be noticed.
I do think that there are some developments, especially what I'm seeing with like 100 Thieves. So 100 Thieves they have like their academy team, and then they have like an academy team. Like the biggest example was like Poom. He was in like their academy team, then went to the academy team, and so there was kind of like a progression for him to actually get to an LCS spot. I know that TSM also do similar like in-house kind of teams as well. Why? What?
Kind of not really. TSM at one point was looking to have a team in the amateur league, but they ended up just saying, "No, we're just going to contract these amateur players and then not actually play an amateur." But I love your point on 100 Thieves because I think 100 Thieves are doing it right because there is no feeder system right now that exists in North America, so they made their own. They're starting to actually work on having that route from amateur to academy to LCS. And like that wasn't done by Riot or anyone. That was just 100 Thieves recognizing that if they want to be a successful organization, they have to start investing in the future. Like I think most LCS teams right now need to start looking towards 2022. Honestly, right now, like we have an issue of recycled talent in NA for our actual native talent. There hasn't been that big of a push from organizations outside of like Cloud9 a bit, and now 100 Thieves of really developing this amateur talent. 100 Thieves is kind of, they're kind of made the first step and they're kind of ahead of all these other teams. Like, yeah, they might not be doing great right now, but like you need to judge them on how they're going to do in 2021 or 2022, not how they're doing right now, because they're kind of playing the long game instead of, looking at just what exists this season to win.
Would you ever see a world where, and obviously it's a little bit crazy, but we've had it prior in EU. Would you ever see a world where maybe like an LCS team looks at kind of getting a roster in Europe and using that as kind of like a feeder system to get certain imports or to develop players like that? Because obviously I know, was it CLG who did it way back? Was it in Europe at one point? Do you think that there's an option for that?
I don't know if Riot would allow that. That's the thing. Like I don't know if organizers, because we ran into this, and I can't speak too much on it, but like that could be kind of be a wall between if it's because it's two Riot run organization or Riot with the LCS, and then with Europe they might not allow it. I think that's why you don't see it anymore.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I do think there's should be, at least right now, from like an academy standpoint, more of a push to use the feeder system that does exist in Europe to kind of round out talent for right now for NA.
One thing you said about with the NA roster building, like they might sometimes wouldn't even do tryouts and often like recycling players and stuff. Do you think like the kind of difference in just how people sort of view sports in America is maybe a bit of a difference there? Because like for example in NA I often hear like when there are players moving around and stuff and talking about contracts and things, I hear people talking about but yeah, this guy is their like franchise player, like marketing kind of thing, and that's why they'll pay him more and this and that. Whereas in Europe, and I wonder if it comes like more from like European sporting background, that's not something I don't think people think about as much. Like, you definitely wouldn't hear fans talking about it, I don't think. So, do you see that as being any difference as well?
That could kind of be a difference. Like my experiences with Optic when they were roster building, and like there was no trialing done. I know for that LCS team, like even for our academy team, there was no trialing that was done. Despite me saying we should. So it's kind of that. It's kind of like the whole recycling of talent kind of goes back to that whole country club issue. They don't want to take a risk on someone they don't know, so they're going to go with players or a player that other players have recommended. Like with NA, like there is a lot more branding around individual players. Like, like the best one I can think of for exactly what you're talking about is Bjergsen. Like Bjergsen's always going to be on TSM. Like he won't play for another team for like even before he became like part owner in it, he wasn't going to play for another team. And that gets really common in NA because instead of the fandom forming around the teams themselves, and like there is fandom around specific teams, there's much more fandom that kind of surrounds specific players in NA, and I think that's really common in NA.
Fair enough. Let's maybe move on and start talking a bit about this current split with Barrage. So one thing I wanted to touch on kind of before we even look at necessarily performances was about the strength of the two groups. I see that being a bit of a discussion lately, and I saw Frumi tweet about it as well. I think he was saying that he saw Group A as being top heavy, whereas Group B like kind of anyone had a chance against anyone. How do you see those groups line up? Because we've kind of seen in playoffs, like with the teams going against each other, I think it's looked like pretty even. Like, I think fourth seed won both games from each group, which was kind of equal, and then I think we saw the first seeds both winning from each group as well. So you've kind of seen it's kind of mirrored a bit. Do you think the groups were perhaps a bit closer than people think? Because I don't know, you kind of get the feeling that in each group, people obviously think their group is harder. Like, and
Right.
yeah. So what were your
Well,
thoughts on that?
I'd be actually interested to seeing how fifth and sixth seed played against each other as well, because I think that's kind of the bigger indicator for group strength than actually the top side. Like I'd want to see Ents versus Dusty and Singularity versus Eminem,
Or we
because
might see Singularity. Oh no, will we see Singularity versus Eminem? Because I don't know how relegation works.
I don't know
I
if they actually play
presumed we
against each
could.
other,
We'll see.
but because that's what I think is probably more of an indicator of like strength of group. Because I do think like Dusty, if they played against Singularity, Ents, or Godsent, would probably be higher than them. They probably would have finished higher if they were in that group. I mean, much like a lot of people were saying that about Barrage. But I do think Riddle and Fnatic are better than, or not Riddle and Fnatic, Riddle and Excel are better than Trick and Munster. So it was kind of like it was. I think Group A was top heavy, whereas Group B there's a bit more evenness to it outside of Fnatic. Like Fnatic was just ahead because they were super consistent. Like that's the big strength of Fnatic. They're very consistent. It's really good for best of ones. I still think Fnatic's gonna win this league after playing against all the various teams, but I do think it's probably gonna be like the top three are gonna be Fnatic, XL, Riddle at this point. So like I think Group B, like you said, a bit more even, a lot more competitive for the lower end. Like us making playoffs 3-7 in the group, I'm happy with that. It doesn't sound great to be like, yeah, we're 3-7, we made it into playoffs, but it's like, every game in that group was just like you have to really fight to get those wins. So you were gonna have the fourth team be a low win team, whereas like on Group A, you had Singularity, you had Ants, you had Godsent. Like those I'd probably say were probably like the easier matches for some teams, or some teams didn't respect it, they'd lose to them. But like I think Group A was you had Riddle, you had XL, then you kind of had Nordavind in there, and then the bottom three were a lot more probably lower.
Fair enough.
I think as well, when you said like, 3-7 we made playoffs, like I think it would have been a lot different depending on how the result of the Godsent game went. So I think then if you just lost to Godsent in the next round, then you have like a different narrative than what you did when you actually won. Because you went 3-7 in a group and then beat a team which finished third and had beaten Nordavind and had beaten all these other sides in that group. So that really skewed where I thought like the power system was in this, because it's like this was a 5-5 Godsent who, to be fair, even obviously, they had that synergy. They beat Nordavind in a tiebreaker to actually go above them anyway. So I felt that there was still momentum behind them, and then you beat them. So then I was like, well, okay, well, so the 5-5 side lost to the 3-7 side, and I'm like, okay, well, where do these groups go now?
Mm-hmm. And like talking on that series. So was there anything you guys had been like particularly working on before that? Because it seemed like, I don't know, the way you guys performed against Godsent did seem, like you kind of stepped up for playoffs, like you got that kind of playoffs buff. So was there anything in particular you guys had been working on for that, or anything that just kind of clicked for that series?
So I mean, we knew, just some backstory. I don't want to can't reveal too much, but we knew we had the mental edge going into Godsent because of scrims, because they were the only team we actually scrimmed on Group A. Just can't tell you how those went, but let's just say we had the mental edge. So for that series, it was, I think, one of the biggest things the team struggled with was the best of one format. We spent the whole season trying to have the team they were in scrims have that team show up to matches, and like we struggled with that the entire regular season. Like everyone talks about how the performance was in matches, and I'm sitting here in scrims watching them just dumpster teams that are going that have already made it to EU Masters at this point. Like they're just tearing these teams apart in scrims, and then they should go and they get into a match, and it's just, where'd that team go? So we tried everything to either take the pressure off them. Maybe we need to put pressure on them. Like maybe we do meditation with Alex, maybe not meditation with Alex. Like trying to figure out what'll get them to play like in scrims. And I think the best of 3 format definitely helped there because it made it so that they have more than one game that determines everything. So they feel more comfortable doing stuff that doing stuff they do in scrims, because in scrims are like this could go really well, or maybe it's more of a flip. Whereas in matches, they were just too focused on not losing.
Yeah.
But the Godsent series, because we had previous experience with them, and we knew definitely how they looked to play, like we had a clear plan going into that series, and we just executed on that. And they were much more comfortable in that series. Both playoff series, they were much more like they were in scrims.
And just on that first series still as well, he kind of didn't get the perhaps recognition because of Dreedy's Aurelia, but Jadran with both games on Syndra in that series was playing really well. I wanted to ask you about that Syndra pick, because I think on like 10-14 it was like pretty much banned like every game, right? And then on 10-15 it still looks pretty high priority, but maybe a bit behind like the Azir, Orianna, and clearly like they led it through for Jadran twice in a row. Do you still see that as being like a top pick, or do you think there's any reason why perhaps it isn't constantly banned quite as much as it was?
For the Syndra pick, it largely comes down to her early trading is much worse. To quote Jadran, she doesn't really get to be a champion until she gets Lost Chapter. Like a lot of her matchups that were good previously are no longer good because she can't get prior in the lane until Lost Chapter. So like the Azir Syndra matchup, which used to be very Syndra favored, is now actually Azir favored until Lost Chapter. So you kind of have to wait for that power spike to even get. So that's why she dropped off in priority. For us, though, Syndra is still just fundamentally a strong champion. Like if you can get once you get to the Lost Chapter point, it's still the same champion. It's just you're not going to have that priority in the early game, so you might have to give up a first dragon, which us as a team, we were fine with that anyway. So it became for us, this is a strong line pick that we know is maybe not going to have the most priority early on, but it's going to still perform. And it's a champion that everyone talked about Jadran's champion pool, like being small or being unique. He actually can play most stuff in the meta really well. It's just people think he's only a Cassid and Vladimir player. It's like Syndra's actually a champion. He played a lot, both in solo queue and in scrims. So like it was no surprise for us how well he played it.
I do want to ask you the question though. Which one did you which flipper performance did you prefer? Did you prefer the Skarner or the Ivern? Because they were two totally different performances in that Godsent game.
Can I say I preferred his Skarner before he went for the Azir dive on the mid turret? Because up to that point, he was doing really good.
Yeah.
And it was after that game, we were talking about the 9-death power spike. I'm just like, if you don't go for this play, you're up tempo, you're winning the map. You just don't go for this play, and the game's over.
Was there just like this conscious decision? Because it felt, I kind of like chuckled to myself because I saw him on Skarner, and then the next game he's on Ivern. I'm like, okay, they've clearly had some conversations at this point. So that is a complete change of a champion.
Well, actually, so we did same bands and same first pick for the second match, and and then all of a sudden there's just a completely different draft. So that was actually because of what they did, not because we were actually switching up. So like for us, we still would have picked Skarner. Like he did his job at Skarner. He was the sacrificial lamb. All he needed to do was go in, grab someone, and die. And he did that wonderfully. Yeah. He overperformed on the death part there, but it was because they rotation Pantheon Karthus, and he's like, you don't pick Karthus when Ivern's up. And he's like, give me Ivern. And like we played around Ivern a lot already, and it's really great for playing through top lane as well. So like at that point they dropped, and then like we knew they were probably looking for like Wukong, and he's like, yeah, if he goes Wukong, I'll go Aurelia. And Ivern Aurelia is just insanely easy to snowball from top lane. So it was like with Flipper, he also kind of has a unique jungle pool. He's very much an enabler kind of jungler. Like you need strong solo lanes that are going to carry around him, because he'll play the Sejuani, the Ivern, the Nunu, the Skarner, that kind of stuff. And it's just kind of depending on the situation, we'll pick what looks best for what we're looking to play through. Ivern's great for playing through top lane, and that's how we wanted to play against Godsent to begin with. So
cool. So then obviously winning that series put you guys up against Riddle. who, unfortunately for you guys, they had been in like really good form, I think, and it looks a lot more consistent than they had like in maybe the first half of the split. How good do you kind of see them as being now? Because they did, after that, well, I think, yeah, it was the series before they played against you. They took a game off Fnatic as well, who were obviously at that point unbeaten. Do you see Riddle as having any chance of pushing on and maybe pushing for that extra EU Masters place, or do you see that as being Fnatic XLs?
So, I mean, there's always a chance for them to get to that EU Master spot. I would give it in favor of XL or Fnatic, though, after playing against them. For us, I actually made an uncharacteristic mistake in the first game with draft, and then game 2 was very close. Actually, we should have won game 2. Like we had full control at the end there, but we made a split decision on that Baron between burning it and turning. Like then Boxing actually pulled off the Baron there, and that's what made that last fight go the way it went. So like in game 2, we had full control to win that game, and we just made one mistake. So for Riddle, I think they're a strong team. They're the only team that, for example, Jadron had issues mid lane with because Senkox is a mid laner that also understands how to utilize and abuse freezes. That was kind of one of Jadron's big benefits as a mid laner, is he understood how to use and abuse freezes. Other mid laners didn't really know how to do that. That's why we could get away with the Cassidy pick. Pretty much game 1 told me that, showed we can't ever pick Cassidy into them because they actually know how to properly punish it. Like we screwed against a lot of teams, and it's just they don't know how to punish Cassidy. Cassidy's a free win. Situation in game 1 where it's like, this is a good Cassidy pick, but it wasn't like they punish it properly, so we can't do that for the rest of the series. But I still think, like, from watching, I mean, they do have a chance if XL loses, because they've had good matchups into XL to beat XL. Like, I think they're 2-0 against XL, so there's a pretty good chance that they can beat XL. But I still think in a best of 3 situation, XL wins. Like, it'd be like a 2-1 situation, and I do think Fnatic beats XL. So,
and you touched on there about that kind of flip at Baron, that where you were kind of in control, and then after that it was one of those things where it's like once it's that late in the game, you lose one fight and that's pretty much it. Had that gone different, do you think you guys would have probably even pushed on to win that series? Because like at that point it would have been 1-1, but you would have just got the win with the momentum, and it's like those kind of games where when it's like a 40+ minute game and you lose it, that's when you're just drained. It feels shit to lose a game that's that long. So do you think that could have even been a turning point? Would you have fancied yourselves to win third?
I mean, like, again, I talk about Scrim Barrage a lot because it was something that very few people got to really see. And like game 2 there, like that was closer to Scrim Barrage. We were very much trading blows with them. It was really, really close. Had we won that, like, our team progressively gets better every game, typically, like both in scrims. Like in scrims, typically we did 3s. Like our first game sucks, game 2's all right, game 3 we smashed them. So I think if it had gone to a game 3, there's probably a high chance we beat them.
I think it was just a really, like, if anything, for a neutral, that game 2 was a very entertaining series anyway. And I think I just want to get kind of like, now when teams come into the NLC, obviously, and when rosters are made, they all come up saying, "Oh, we want to win it. We want to win it. Want to win it." Are you happy, kind of overall, with your roster, with where you kind of finished comparatively to what everybody else was like?
Yes, actually, to that point, everyone comes in and they're like, they want to win it. They want to win it.
Yeah.
Our motto was, we want 4th place. like our goal from the regular season was we just want 4th seed. That's all we want. Like, we understood the situation that we were coming into this league. Like, as everyone said, roster building this season for us specifically was kind of a nightmare. Like, we had no disillusions about where we stood in the league in general. Like, for us, I think the biggest thing was, like, I think Frumi said it, he hasn't been as happy as he was knowing that just when after that Dusty game. Like, the Dusty game was the big game this whole season. Playoffs is just for fun, essentially. Like, as soon as we beat Dusty, we're in playoffs. We've avoided relegation and all that kind of stuff. We're in it for the next year. Like, we're good. we've made it. So in the playoffs, like obviously you want to go as far as you can in playoffs, but for us, like getting fourth seed, making it to playoffs, like that was us reaching our goal. And then from there, finishing sixth, fifth, like that was a great finish for us. Like I'm incredibly happy with how the guys performed against Riddle. Also kind of nice that we finished higher than Munster. That puts a smile on both me and Fumi's face. But like for us again, we saw this season as a kind of setting up as well for like next season. Seeing what players here we really like, seeing how we're gonna move the roster forward. Because of COVID and everything, a lot of our off-season plans kind of fell through, like with sponsorships and that kind of stuff, which made it harder on the roster building. So for us, we kind of knew this season is to get into next season.
I think as well, what's interesting to see is you actually kind of compare it to last season, and I think it's easy to say. Obviously, the level of competition had stepped up from the UKLC to the NLC, but you actually kind of look at where Barrage finished, like mathematically, and it is a little bit of a step down, but it's not as bad of a step down as what I think a lot of people are expecting. Because and people were really, really praising that Barrage roster last split. When you actually look at it and you think kind of with the resources which other teams have had as well, the drop down hasn't been as bad, I think, as what a lot of people were saying.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that I think isn't talked about as much as far as like a narrative for teams and their performance is also how much budget and resources they had going into it. Like like last season as well, like both in the trialing from both me and Frumi, like we with the resources we had, I feel like both rosters were just insanely performed comparative to how much actual resources we had to build those rosters. Like you kept bringing last season was a lot of creativity with building that roster. Like we kind of had to go really far outside the box to get that roster. And this season as well, it was, like we still had the same resources of the previous season, and we still get a roster that made playoffs. I think budget wise, we were on the same level. Like we were probably the lowest budget in the league. Maybe I don't know how much Godsent was on, but we'd probably be tied for them for budget. But both the rosters actually ended up making playoffs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, so I know that Travis Gafford, he does it with like the LCS, where he kind of gets what the budget of the squad was and then kind of divides it by like wins and performance. And you would probably say that probably like you and Godsent would be up there with some of the highest because of just of how kind of low the budget was compared to, I mean, obviously without knowing obviously the figures, but you would expect Munster, for example, would probably be bottom of that list with the amount of wins that they'd got. Well, probably maybe Fnatic and XL might be there because of how much they cost. But outside of the academy, like Munster, for example, had a different expectation, a different goal, and didn't reach that. And then that's what's it's kind of interesting to see. And I think a few people have brought this up that sometimes it isn't just the amount of money you can actually splash at a player, it's how they can work together as a team. And I think that's what kind of solidified some sides, especially I would say the comparison between Godsent and Munster. Like that's a side which obviously wasn't spent a much, but worked well as a team, to Munsters, which was spent a lot and didn't work well as a team.
Yeah, and I wonder, especially with Munster, like what we'll see from them next year now. Like if like the Munster like execs will be as happy to throw so much money at it. Like you saw when the players were signed, their interviews and things were saying like they wanted Winnie U Masters, and they've obviously been way off that. So yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see like start next season what their team starts looking like, because I can't imagine they'll be spending the same kind of levels.
I hope to see No Name in that Munster roster, if I'm being completely honest. Probably it's a bit of a cheaper option as well. Definitely probably a cheaper option. But I think No Name, if there's one thing Munster's done right, they've had a really good academy side, I would have to say. They have funded a little bit into the academy and they have developed a few players. And I do think No Name probably deserves to be in the NLC next split.
Yeah. And to be fair, actually, when we spoke to Mulgrew, he said that they were kind of going for that thing, wasn't it? Like trying to get some of the decent up and coming talent, and you'd imagine that should be with a view to eventually move them onto the main roster if they're good enough. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised on that either. Just to touch on just the rest of the playoffs just a little bit more. So obviously you said that, imagine Fnatic winning, probably XL beating Riddle. Does that mean you imagine Riddle beating Tricked as well? Or would you see Tricked
Yeah,
putting up a fight there?
and this isn't like any kind of anything against Tricked. Tricked and Riddle, played against both of them, and I think in general Riddle have the better matchup into them. Tricked, their biggest strength is in draft. They have a lot of flexibility. It's really good for best of ones because they can pull out stuff that you aren't expecting, like a Sig spot lane. And like they can really flex. Like set is a huge pick for them. That's why we always banned it. They can flex it to 4 places. They will flex it support, mid, jungle, top lane. So like they have a lot of flexibility there. And if you're not ready for that, like if you're not ready for the Sona Lux, or you're not ready for them flexing weird stuff everywhere, like they can win games off of that. But I think when they're playing standard is when they look their weakest. And I think if they have to play standard against Riddle, I think Riddle has a huge advantage there because from playing against Riddle, fundamentally they're a strong team, especially through Senkux. And I think that's probably where you're going to see the big difference between the two is between Senkux and Aaron. And I'm going off of this as well based off of what Jadrin talked about between the two mid laners because Aaron was not able to properly punish freezes whereas Senkux can. And that's a huge thing when you have with Riddle, they have strong both bot and top side. And when you have a mid laner that can punish freezes, it pretty much just makes it so that if you're unable to actually punish their side lanes and the mid laner freezes on you, your early game is just over. Mm-hmm. And so I can see, barring Tricked having a lot of creative and unique drafts going into that, Riddle winning.
I think that'll be an interesting matchup, the mid lane, like especially two teams where they have played some weird stuff. Like everyone obviously played like Pantheon, like even in the first game. We've seen Senkux putting out like Annie and stuff. So, or was that? It might be Sebex actually. I get mixed up.
That was Sebex.
Right,
we had to play.
We saw Senkux played Vel'Koz.
Everyone pulled out their crazy stuff against us. I don't know why. It just was always us.
Was that the Annie Olaf game where it was Tibbers versus the Ivern? Or what's Daisy?
We had Ivern, yes. It was Annie.
Yes, so yes. It was one of the greatest things when I felt both in the mid lane and they were both just fighting each other, and I was like, "That's great. I just want this more."
That was where we struggled the most in our season. Was just in all of our games we were always this close to winning, and then. You have an issue with one of the players or confidence issues or something like that. Like that game, we were set up to win that game as well, and then just one mistake.
So moving forward, then do you imagine you'll be sticking with Barrage for next season? Then you kind of some of the stuff you explained in there kind of gave the idea that you would still be there. Would there be any offers that could maybe tempt you away?
For personal reasons, like even though I have my opinion of the NA scene and how it works, like I still am looking for positions in NA, and that has to do with personal stuff, like for my fiance, that kind of stuff. She has family in LA, and so one of the big things with me continuing to be in coaching is actually to try and get a position in NA, so that she can move closer to family and be closer to her family. So like I've spent like Academy and LCS obviously are positions that I'm open to. This is a long off season, and I've loved working with Barrage, so they're obviously one of my top picks to keep working with. Regardless, like if everything, if I don't get any offers or anything like that, I will always work with Barrage. Jeff, Frumi, Alex, all of them, they're great people. It's been wonderful working with them. So I'm still obviously keeping my options open, but it would probably take a lot to tempt me away from Barrage if I'm working in Europe.
Yeah, fair enough. And with NA, would you see yourself? You said about going with Academy. Do you reckon you'd try and at least get some guarantees around the roster building, like you said about with Optic, that they no tryouts and stuff like that? Is that something you just want to kind of check on a bit more beforehand?
Yeah, like if I'm working in NA, like an Academy team, like honestly, my preference would probably be to work in academy over LCS, even if I had the option between the two, simply because I really like helping people grow, helping people work. It's what I found I really enjoy being a coach. And for me, I'm really invested in trying to improve the health of the region for North America. So I definitely see Academy as an opportunity to help create structures to do that. Like I definitely implement the kind of systems that I think they should implement into an Academy team system, so that at least there's some route for players to go to Academy, go to LCS.
Fair enough. I think we're sort of nearing towards the end of the episode. I haven't got too much left that I was planning to cover. Tom, you got anything, or Surza, any other topics you wanted to touch on?
Nothing really for me. Are we doing a little bit of predictions as well for the upcoming?
I thought we might do that in the next episode. I think we're planning to do another one this week before playoffs comes up. One thing I will ask then before we finish though is Clash is on today, so I'll be playing in that in a few hours. And I'm looking for your advice, Surza, on what sort of team comps we should be looking at. Bear in mind we're like tier 3 Clash, which is crap basically. We're like borderline gold.
Then if it's at that point, I'd say play comfort. The strongest thing you can do is just play comfort, especially at lower levels. Don't need to be fancy with it. Don't need to worry too much about trying to get these huge counter picks or anything. Just playing comfort and what you guys play together well is always the best way to go about it.
Fair enough. To give you some insight on what that level was like, yesterday I was playing top lane. I was against an Ashe top laner with Ignite as well. She didn't have much impact, unsurprisingly.
See, I can't even talk to you about the meta significance of a top lane Ashe with Ignite. Like you're just gonna play what you're gonna play. I just hope you're not a one trick, because you're just gonna get banned.
I do have one question. It'd be interesting to see what your opinion is. Obviously, you can't pick a Barrage player, but who's been your NLC player of the split?
See, that's really hard, simply because I'm more exposed to Group B than Group A, so I can't speak too much Group A. Though if I wanted to go for the quick and easy answer, I'd say, because he said not Barrage, I'll just go with Ericsson. I'll go with my boy Ericsson. So that's the easy way out. Honestly speaking, the player that I think has been probably the most consistent and we've been the most pain for us when we had to play against them was Dan. Dan was always the thing I wasn't looking forward to play against when we were playing against Fnatic.
That's a really
last
good
season
answer.
and this season.
That's the right answer.
I'll give him a fiddle any day.
Dan's the right answer. Dan is the right answer.
Because that's what you said, wasn't it, as well, Tom?
Yeah, maybe.
Brownie points. All right then. I think we'll finish up on this one then. Thanks for coming on, Surza. Good to have a chat, and hope to see you back on Barrage, so we can have you on again.
Yeah, I'd love to come on again, and thanks for having me.
No worries. So yeah, for those watching, I think we've had a few dipping in and out on the live stream on Twitch. If you're still around there, then please do feel free to drop a follow. Otherwise, if you're watching or listening later on YouTube or Spotify, you can follow there as well. And also for those watching with the video, either on Twitch or YouTube, you can see all our Twitters on the screen as well. So feel free to drop us a follow there. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.